the Educational Physics Podcast.
Hello, my name is João Figueiredo and welcome to the Educational Physics Podcast, episode number 3. Today's guest, Daniel Glass. Daniel Glass is a drummer, educator, and an author, a member of the band Royal Crown Revue, a band that is very special for many, many reasons, and the band that was, and still is, I guess, a very important element within Daniel Glass's sphere of knowledge. Because what Royal Crown Revue do is basically to pay homage to Northern American music. Beyond that, Daniel Glass is an author of multiple books, and he is very well known for his passion for history, especially, again, the history of American music. He is an expert in this field, and he will share with us in this conversation everything that motivated him to pursue a career almost as the historian of drums. We also talk about my pressing subject, which is online education. Perhaps this was a topic that we somehow disagreed on, but I also saw a lot of the commonalities between our ideas, and one of the things that was definitely addressed was the fact that we need to be very careful when it comes to online education so we don't stifle education in itself. So now, with no further ado, here's Daniel Glass.
Over the years, of course, I've developed kind of my educational approach, my educational program, as it were. And it's, I think, what I'm happy about is I've sort of created something that is somewhat unique in the fact that I'm teaching a very focused kind of technique, which is based in large part on what I learned with Freddy Gruber, which is a whole thing we can talk about, and to some extent from Bruce Becker, who I studied with in later years. But I also really have infused it with my deep interest and passion in the history and evolution of our instrument and the way that people have played it. And particularly, I think it really helps if you're teaching somebody some kind of technique or some kind of style, if they understand why they're supposed to do what they're doing and why the style should feel this way or sound this way or the limbs should be balanced this way. If they can see it in some bigger perspective with a really practical musical sense or purpose behind it, then it makes a lot more sense when you're learning it. You know, I think if you want to know my biggest problem, I guess, with drum education is that too often it's just about limb independence or, you know, the limb independence of a particular style or a particular, you know, genre or a particular song or a particular fill. And it's like, get your arms and legs to do this, and that's the end result. And I think, to me, you know, one of the downsides or one of the dangers is that we can turn drumming education just into limb independence, and it's much more than that, you know. And especially when you talk about historical styles, which of course is what I'm into, but really, you know, jazz and swing, blues, you know, rock and roll. One of the issues I have with drum education is that there is a lack of context. So if you're going to learn, and I say especially with regard to more traditional styles, but really rock and roll, you know, rock and roll comes from something. It comes from styles that came before it. And the way that it feels, if you want to play it well, if you want to give it the right feeling, you have to understand more about where it comes from. And just, you know, learning to get your arms and legs to do stuff it's not enough. and also I just, I have a podcast as well, and I talk a lot about a lot of different issues. And the podcast one of the ones I just recorded, which will go up in the next couple of weeks, is 5 reasons why you need to listen to classic American music, for lack of a better term. And I sort of define what that means. But the reasons are things like you'll be more employable, you'll have more of a creative edge in terms of your bag of tricks. You'll learn how to listen to music better by learning how to listen to older recordings. And so when I teach, I'm teaching technical stuff, but I'm always kind of wrapping it up in historical awareness context, so that you have hopefully the student has a deeper experience in getting the why behind the what. That's
and that is
the why behind the what.
Well, that's one of the things that attracted me to your message, was that you were very adamant on putting context to things, which maybe this is a very relatable thing. I think that way regardless. That's just how I'm wired, I guess. And I really need to ask the questions. I'm that annoying guy. Maybe that's why I'm doing this now, right? I have many unanswered questions that I just don't even want to go there by myself, right? I want to hear it for someone else, so I don't fall into the confirmation bias trap. But I guess I have a maybe very basic question, but where did this passion for history come from? Because I'm not familiar with anyone who's as passionate about the history, especially of American music, as you are. So where did that come from?
Well, it's sort of that's a good question, I guess. I think for me, when I grew up, I wasn't really planning to be a professional musician. I was in academic fields. I went to very good schools. My parents, thankfully, blessed me with a very good education. I was into it. I dug it. I went to college. I grew up in Honolulu. I went to the same school that Barack Obama went to, and a lot of heavyweight people went there. It's a really terrific school. So I got a really solid base, and then I went to college. It wasn't until after I got my bachelor's degree, which was in psychology, that I realized that music is where my heart lay. And I had been playing music my whole life. But so I kind of put down the academic thing, and I went full bore into, being a musician. So woodshedding, I went to music school in Los Angeles in '91, and, all the things that people do when they want to get into it. And then I spent just, several hard years plugging away in LA, trying to figure out where I was headed and all that kind of stuff. And luckily for me, and I took advantage of some opportunities that, came my way. I was prepared. I successfully joined this band Royal Crown Revue, and then things happened and we got signed to Warner Brothers, and we had we embarked on a really wonderful career. And after a few years, that was in 1994, by 99 or so, I think I was really missing the academic side of my life. And being in Royal Crown Revue, I was learning a lot about many styles of music that I had really no understanding of. I thought I knew, when I went to music school, I learned about bebop and Elvin Jones and Tony Williams and, but you don't really go farther back. And you also don't learn that there are many styles of jazz that aren't bebop, styles of music that swing, that are pop music. So it's, the equivalent to what we call groove music today. But that you really need to have a foundation in swing to understand those things, like big band 1930s, music, and rockabilly and Western swing, and, all different styles, jump blues. And I was learning about all these because the band were real students of history. And they were really all about doing it right and getting it right and being authentic, even though what was cool about it was that it wasn't just like a nostalgia band. We sort of blended things, and we wrote, we all acknowledged that we had grown up listening to
heavy rock and punk rock and, you know, ska and all kinds of other styles. So we were not afraid to blend new stuff with old stuff, and that's sort of where that whole retro swing thing came from. It was a sort of a new take on an older style. So it wasn't like nostalgia or trying to recreate the past. It was about acknowledging the past and then bringing, you know, more modern influences in. And we wrote a lot of original music. And so all of that was really wonderful. But I sort of realized that my knowledge of what I was doing was kind of limited. And the guys would say, well, you know, yeah, but you're overplaying that, or you're trying to make that sound like all this big band stuff, or you're playing too bop-ish, you know. And I was like, well, what do you mean? I'm playing jazz. I'm, you know, and the only jazz I knew was like bop and forward, right? And that's kind of, unfortunately, most people who go to music school these days, that's what their consideration of music that swings, that's what it is. Unless maybe you're thinking about blues and just playing a shuffle, right? So, I was very influenced in 1990, probably 1997 or 98. Zorro's book, The Commandments of R&B Drumming, came out, and I'd always been a student of the drums. I was always, everywhere I went, I was buying all the instructional books and the DVDs, and you know, I was always an avid student, I guess you could say. And I loved his book because his book took 60s soul, 70s. You know, funk, and 80s and 90s kind of like new jack swing or hip hop, you know, and made it the most fun, interesting, entertaining. You know, his book was just, it was amazing. It was really detailed. It was really thorough, but at the same time, it was incredibly fun and entertaining. And his language and the way he presented all that stuff was extremely appealing. So I decided that I wanted to start doing that for the styles of music that I was into. And by about 99, I began interviewing drummers. There were many drummers from these eras, from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, who had retired to Los Angeles. There were guys like Earl Palmer there, and Hal Blaine, and Louis Bellson, and you know, just so many guys that were available to me. And so, you know, and then I met Zorro, and we became good friends, and he immediately really got into what I was about. And around that time, he was editing a magazine called Stick It Magazine, which was a little ahead of its time, but it's similar to Drumhead Magazine now. I think Drumhead, does that still come with a CD?
I know the magazine, but I'm not sure if it does.
Yeah, well, Stick It.
Yeah, well, Stick It, you would get a CD. I mean, now we're past the age of CDs, but you actually, that was part of the appeal of Stick It. You'd get a CD that came with the magazine, and you could hear the music that you were reading about. So I began to write articles for Stick It. I began to write articles for Modern Drummer. And most importantly, I began to connect with all of these older drummers. And that really was what, like, then it went from being an academic pursuit. It went from being a something that was more abstract that you read about in books, or you watched the DVDs, or you listened to the records. And now I'm becoming friends with the guys who played on the records. And it goes beyond just, you know, that they played on the records. Now they're my friends. And now I'm realizing these guys are old, and people are not, you know, documenting what they had to offer, this incredible material, the incredible stuff that they played on. There was nobody telling their story. And then it became kind of personal for me, you know. For example, there was a guy named Johnny Kirkwood in Los Angeles, who was one of the first drummers I had interviewed. And he had played with Louis Jordan, you know, who was a very, very important figure in the 1940s in the transition from big band music into rhythm and blues, and therefore into rock and roll. And Louis Jordan, I think more than anybody, created the framework for what a rock band would become eventually, you know. And he was the most popular black artist of the 1940s. But, you know, nobody today really knows who he is unless you start getting into, you know, your history. So this guy had played with Louis Jordan, and he came to my house, brought his drum set. I actually owned a house in LA that had a recording studio in the bottom level that somebody else owned. It was like a duplex. So I went down there with him, and he recorded a bunch of these grooves, these classic Louis Jordan shuffles, you know. And I'm getting the word from the horse's mouth. And no one had ever written anything about this guy or his contributions, Johnny Kirkwood. So I wrote an article in Stick It magazine about him, and we recorded these grooves and they went on the CD. And, you know, his family was so overwhelmed, and his wife, I became good friends with his wife. And then through very sad and freak set of circumstances, he died before the article came out. He died right after it came out. He did get to see it, but it was so tragic, you know. And I became, for example, very good friends with Buddy Harman, who was in Nashville, you know, and he created, I call him the architect of country drumming, or the father of country drumming. You know, I mean, he single-handedly played on 18,000 recordings, and he's on the beginning of Pretty Woman, and he's on all the Everly Brothers, and he's playing with Patsy Cline on her biggest hits, and he played on all of Elvis's movie soundtracks in the 1960s with DJ Fontana. You know, this guy has done the most amazing stuff, and although he's kind of around Nashville, he's known, no one ever documented his story really all that seriously. And what I did with him, I mean, I became good friends with him so much so that I would stay at his house when I would go to Nashville. And he became a fan of Royal Crown, and you know, it was a beautiful friendship. And so one day I went with my video camera and I sat with him for 3 hours and just got his life story. And then I made DVDs out of that for his family. And again, you know, they were overwhelmed, and it was a beautiful thing. And then he passed away a few years after that. But it's sort of like I felt like I was in a race against time to tell these guys' stories and document as much stuff as I could. And so there was a period between about 1999 and maybe 2005 where I did a tremendous amount of interviewing. I have about 60 interviews that I recorded. Unfortunately, most of them are on cassette, and I'm now, when I go to LA, back to LA in January, they're still there in LA. I'm going to bring them back, and I'm going to seriously get to work digitizing them, because I'm afraid that, you know, cassettes are not a good way to store information. Let's put it that way. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question, but that's, you know, and then I just started down this road of researching and studying. And when I began to put the Century Project DVD together, what I realized is that there's just an incredible story here to be told. The story of the evolution of the drum set, and how that evolution, you can look at that evolution from the perspective of gear evolution. You know, so there's the whole thing of vintage gear. You can look at that story of the drum set from the players and who they were and what they were doing and the circumstances under which they recorded and how they used the gear. You can look at it from the perspective of how the drum set as an instrument is a reflection of the story of America during that time, and how, you know, the evolution of America from the end of the Civil War up to the Beatles. You know, you can kind of bookend that as the century, as it were, 1865 to 1965, and you can see through the story of the drum set how America evolved, you know, not only like where the pieces came from, but also what musicians were doing, what drummers were doing, what the job of the drummer was, and how much it changed over time, and how much every important style of music, you almost could be defined by the beat that accompanied it. You know what I mean? And whichever version of the drum set that was around that had evolved, how that version accompanied it. So I don't know, I'm just into it. What can I say? You know, I think it's a really compelling story, and I'm trying to tell that story. And for me, I sort of have bookended that 100-year period, and then a lot of the stories I'm telling now are things that I'm working on, projects I'm doing, are things within that century. There's lots of other things that are later that I'm also interested in, but you know, that's sort of my area that I am very excited about. And so I'm digging into, you know, stuff, military drumming and how that evolved, and, you know, what was happening in the late 1800s. I'm digging into, well, I'll tell you more about that, I guess, as we go. I'll tell you about some of the projects I'm doing and some of the things I've recently done. But anyway, that's a very
long is good. This is a podcast, right? So
yes. So some poor person is in their car right now, stuck in traffic, and hopefully we're distracting
Exactly.
them from their.
I was going to ask
miseries.
you actually later on into the conversation what your click moment was in your life, in your career, but you kind of gave me some insight already on that. I mean, I would assume, and you can, and I hope you do expand on that a little bit more. But I would assume that that moment of meeting those heroes of yours, those idols, those inspirations, and suddenly there you are, hanging out with them, and you know, basically sharing the same, you know, bedrooms, perhaps even like, and living rooms and kitchens and whatnot. Was that the click moment for you, or is there something, or are there many click moments that kind of led to where you are today, which I would assume is also true, but
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely. You know, certainly I would sort of break it into 3 categories of things that were happening, or 4 really categories of things that were happening in my life. Number 1 was my involvement with Royal Crown Revue, which was a very, very unusual band in terms of what it was doing at that time, and the path that it was taking, and how I was, you know, got kind of roped into that path and went down the path with those guys. And you know, they as I said, they were really students of the craft. They all were collectors of vintage gear and collectors of all things of sort of mid-century modern. So when we would drive across the country, we would stop at every antique mall and buy cool vintage suits and buy tie bars and, you know, pulp novels and just cool stuff. And so you're, you know, not only playing the music, but you're living it through the art, you know, the artifacts, you know, that you're finding. And you know, we all were, you know, met a lot of the older generation of guys and hung out with them and played with them and learned from them. And we just were like, and what was cool was that it was a very new thing at that time. Nobody was really doing it. So we were sort of on this adventure, and we also were a little bit, I mean, it was a pretty tough band. Like 3 of the guys had never graduated from high school. One of the guys had kind of like grown up in Watts and was sort of like one foot in a gang. But at the same time, like that gave us this kind of gang-like mentality when we would get up on stage, because musically what we were doing was so different than what, you know, everyone else was doing at that time, right? So in the 80s it was hair metal, and then in 1991 Nirvana shows up and it's grunge, and neither of those fits into what we're doing, you know. And I could talk about the evolution of the swing scene, and actually I do talk about that a lot in a podcast that episode that I have. But in any case, that for me was extremely transformative, because I never ever thought, it's like I use the analogy of Columbus, right? You know, Columbus went from you know, Spain to the New World, and he thought he was going to the East Indies, and he was going to land in the East Indies where he was going to have all these gold and spices and everything. And instead he ended up, you know, discovering, quote unquote, America, which led to something totally different than what he originally thought he was going to do. Right. I mean, so it was sort of the same thing for me. I went to Los Angeles. I wanted to be Vinnie Colaiuta, probably like every other guy that moved to Los Angeles in 1991. And I ended up doing something that is nothing like that in a way, you know, but it was cool because I embraced it, and that has led me on an amazing journey and has allowed me to bring some stuff to the drumming community that is unique and has given me kind of a unique story, which is cool, you know. In addition to the involvement with Royal Crown Revue, I began to study. In 1992, the year I got out of music school, I began to study with Freddy Gruber. And the studying with Freddy couldn't have gone hand in hand better with the relationship with Royal Crown Revue, because Freddy had lived through all these times. He knew a lot of these drummers. He knew a lot of drummers that died 20 years before. He was tight with Papa Joe Jones, Philly Joe Jones. I mean, you name any drummer. I would just go and start talking about, you know, this music that we were playing, or talking about the guys that, you know, some of the guys that interviewed, and he knew so much about all of that. And the way that he taught also impacted me because it was so outside the box. You know, Neil Peart in the Rush movie calls him the Yoda of drumming, and I really think that's an apt description of Freddy, because if you remember Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, and Luke goes to Yoda's planet, and the planet is not a very comfortable place. Yoda's not a very comfortable guy. He's not warm and fuzzy. You know, he speaks in riddles. He talks backwards. He puts Luke through this hellacious training regimen, and Luke doesn't know what the hell he's doing there or why he's there. But as it goes on, he comes up with this amazing ancient technology that people are not really using or knowing about anymore, and he becomes a Jedi, you know, in a way. And so that's sort of like, I think some of Freddy's other students could say this is a similar experience. Obviously, Neil Peart had that experience, but it was very similar in that Freddy wasn't the most comfortable guy in the world to be around. He could be very sweet. He could be very hard. He could be cranky and cantankerous. He could be mean. He could be lovely. He was a chain smoker, and you would sit in your lesson and he would be smoking in your face the whole time you were there. You know, his house was like a college bachelor who never grew up. You know, it was just kind of a mess because he didn't have a wife. He didn't have somebody living there with him. So it was like kind of funky, but at the same time, you'd find a picture with like Mitch Mitchell going, "Freddy, I love you." And you're like, what? You know, and a picture of Freddy with this one and that one and these legendary guys. And you just, I mean, it was a wonderful and difficult experience. But at the same time, I came away from that experience completely thinking differently about the drums. Like, absolutely turned my mind upside down about what are we doing behind the drums? What is our purpose as a drummer? And what are we really trying to achieve when we play the drums? And it had nothing to do with styles. It had nothing to do with licks or chops. It had everything to do with how we move, how we hold the sticks, how we define grip. And, you know, it was very, very challenging. I always tell people I used to walk out of every lesson with Freddy feeling totally demoralized and hopeless, and feeling so excited and hopeful, like all at the same time, you know, and not knowing which way, to go. But it was sort of blind faith, and after a bunch of years, things began to become clear. And by '94, I was playing full-time with Royal Crown, so all the stuff I had from Freddy, I was really able to start to put it into play. And of course, I was playing these traditional styles of music, so all that was wonderful. And so anyway, Royal Crown Revue, sort of click moment 1, Freddy Gruber click moment 2, reading Zorro's book and meeting him click moment number 3, because Zorro also is one of the greatest motivators. He's just like walking motivation, and he really made me believe that what I was doing, the work I wanted to do, the books I wanted to write, and the clinics I wanted to create, because he was doing all this stuff at that point. He was one of the biggest superstars of the clinic world at that point, and had his books and DVDs were just selling off the charts. He actually did, I think, over 100 clinics in a single year, which today I don't think is even possible. And he was getting big company support, and this is in the late 90s when it was a different world than it is today. There was no YouTube, and people were, and there was no downloading of stuff for free, and all that. So he really nailed it, took advantage of that whole time period, and he was a great self-promoter, and he was a great motivator, and he believed in me. And so, he gave me a lot of confidence, because I'm like, who am I? And nobody's going to be interested in this stuff. I had other mentors tell me, what do you want to do with history? No one's interested in history, and you can't sell history and all this kind of stuff. I mean, these are like educators, top educators telling me this. It's like, wow, can you destroy my dreams anymore, please? But from the first moment I met Zorro, he had this unwavering belief in me, which was really special. And, we worked together for a long time. I wrote a lot of articles for Stick It, and then I wrote the Commandments book. And we worked on that together, and we put it into his formula, and I tried to bring the same fun and energy to that book that he had given me. I thought, well, okay, so you can teach people. I started to learn that if you're teaching people about something that they think they're not interested in, right? The word history, right? People are like, oh, history. I hated history in school. So what? So I didn't use the word history. I don't use the word history in any of my stuff. I talk about tradition, evolution, all these other words, but I don't use the word history. Just taking Zorro's enthusiasm, his passion for the subject, and tried to bring that into the stuff that I was doing. And certainly I think it's there in the book that we put together as a team, The Commandments of Early Rhythm and Blues Drumming. And what's really satisfying to me is that book came out in 2009, and it did okay, but now, what is it, 2017? So almost 8 years later, 9 years later, the book is selling better than it did when it came out. And I think the reason is that people are catching up to what it is I'm talking about, in regard to the history, the evolution. In that particular context, that book deals with the 1940s and 50s and blues drumming, and it's really like the ultimate book about shuffle drumming. So if you're interested in shuffles, there's like over 100 shuffle examples and 16 play-along tracks and all kinds of stuff, in addition to the historical content. So all that came together for me in the 90s. The band, the Freddy's teaching, and Zorro, and getting some chops together as a writer, and I would have to tell you that writing is hard as hell. Like I sometimes think, why have I set myself on this course? I now have 5 books and 3 DVDs, and I'm working on 2 other books, which have been much slower going now because I'm so busy doing my thing now. I don't have as much time to work on that stuff. But I've also had an article in Drum Magazine for about 8 years now. It's a little column at the beginning called A Moment in History, which is maybe 8 of 12 issues of Drum. They published that article, and that so it's been a long and interesting journey, and now I feel much more comfortable as a writer. But it's still daunting. I have this huge book project that I'm just at the start of that I'll tell you more about. But it's just, when you have sort of a huge, I kind of have learned over the years that I don't do anything small. Everything I do kind of is very epic in scope. And so, of course, then, you set yourself up for troubles when you want to make such large. It's just hard. It's hard work. It takes a long time, but I hear you.
Actually, I'm gonna try to take a mental note, because that brings a question into my mind. But there's a couple of things that I'd like to unpack there. For example, I have a kind of a set list of questions here topics that I'd like to cover. One of them, of course, says Freddy Gruber, and as to how that relationship came about. You already explained what you took from it, but how did it begin? How did you meet because Freddy Gruber, for me, and just to set up the question, for me, it was always this very mystical character. And again, mind you, I live across the pond, right? So it's like, he was this inaccessible, unattainable, you don't even know if it exists, kind of unicorn. That everyone respects him beyond belief. You have Daniel Glass, you've got Dave Weckl, Neil Peart, all these guys just like Freddy, man, Freddy changed my life. And you're like, but who's this guy? Right? There's nothing that he never wrote a book, as far as I'm aware. It's all very, including people that I've spoken to who, this is the irony of it, who are from New York. I don't know Freddy Gruber. Like one of them being Alan Herman. who I will also speak in this podcast to.
Yeah,
He already told me, like, I don't know. I don't know the guy.
Alan and I had we did a very cool, there's a video of Alan and I on YouTube, talking about Freddy and sort of comparing notes, I guess. And in the end, we kind of agreed on most stuff. Like, we all kind of arrived at the same conclusion. It's funny because the first time I ever called Freddy up, he yelled at me. So that was how it all began, at least from my perspective. Freddy, when I was coming up in LA in the 90s, was like a best kept secret. And he, so his name was around, but he was this same thing, mysterious figure. And I'd heard a lot of people who I really respected, saying great things about him. I remember when I was in music school, I went to a clinic of John Hernandez from the band Oingo Boingo, who has been in LA for years. He was a show drummer. He did a lot of amazing stuff, but he's best known for his work in the band Oingo Boingo. And he was a major Freddy guy. So he did a clinic at Cal State Northridge that I went to while I was in music school. They had a bunch of clinics that they put on during the course of that year. I saw Bernard Purdy. I saw, who else did I see? I'm trying to remember. Anyway, I went to John Hernandez's clinic, and he introduced his teacher and mentor, Freddy Gruber. So here's this like little kind of nerdy looking Jewish New Yorker with bad posture, his arms crossed, his pants are up kind of high. He was wearing a white t-shirt, like just a regular undershirt that was so threadbare that it was like, you could see it thin. Sometimes you can almost see through it, just an undershirt. And I'm like, who the hell is this guy? Like, what? This is the great mentor of these guys, So like I said, he was a real character. But when I finished school, I wanted to continue my studies. I only went to school for a 1-year program. I went to a place called the Dick Grove School of Music, which was very similar to Berklee in that it had professionals training you to be a professional musician. And of course, because it was in LA, amazing faculty was there. I got to study with Steve Houghton, Emil Richards, John Ferraro, who was in Larry Carlton's band for years. Chuck Silverman, very famous. He did all the Latin drum set stuff, and everybody there was a heavyweight. So it was a great school. And when I got done, I wanted to study privately with somebody. I wanted to continue, and everybody kept saying, you got to go to Freddy. So one morning in January of 1992, I graduated at the end of December. It was 1 year, January to December. I called this number at 11 o'clock. I thought, it's 11. He'll be up. I wake him up at 11, and he berates me, cusses me out, and then says, all right, come next Tuesday at 5, and hangs up, basically. And so thus began, the hang of all hangs, really. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. I mean, part of the reason why Freddy was not better known is because he was not an easy person to hang out with. And a lot of people, you had to, when you would go, you would have to kind of give up the rest of your day, because it wasn't like go in at 5 and have the lesson from 5 to 6 and you're on your way. It was show up at 5 because that's when he told you to get there. And then maybe there'd be 2 other students ahead of me, and I'd have to sit around for hours. And in between each student, there'd be like an hour or a 90-minute hang in the kitchen where he has a cup of coffee, instant coffee, and, is like talking about the news and about the world and about philosophy, and not even really necessarily talking about music at all. And, and smoking 40 cigarettes. And then you'd have to take him to the grocery store, and then he'd have all these little containers of chicken in the fridge, and he'd get one out and hold it under your nose. Does that smell good? And one time he got in my car, and I hadn't, I was a musician. My car was dusty and messy, and he was like, oh my God, it was a 5-minute drive to the market. And he freaked out and was covering his, took his shirt, was covering his nose because he was like, I'm going to die of all the dust, And I'm like, well, maybe you should not smoke 2.5 packs of cigarettes a day. That might help. Then in the middle of the lesson, he would go off to literally like brush his hair or floss his teeth or he had a girlfriend in Las Vegas, Cindy, very nice lady, but they would get on the phone at 2 a.m. because he was on that late night schedule, the jazz musician late night schedule, And I realized the best time to call him was actually at 2 a.m. That was the time to call him, not 11 in the morning. So in any case, he'd get on the phone with Cindy on the speakerphone for like 45 minutes. And I'd be just sitting in the lesson room like, what am I supposed to do? So a lot of people didn't have the patience for this. They didn't get what he was teaching. They weren't willing to like stick it out, And he also made audacious claims, he claimed at our very first lesson, he said, play for me. I played for him and he said, you know what, Danny? He called me Danny, which not very many people call me. He said, right now you're sitting outside the candy store with your face pressed up against the glass. I'm going to give you the key. And I was like, who the hell does this guy think he is? I went to music school. I've been playing drums for 15 years, Of course, me having attitude, and I knew nothing, and he did. I mean, in essence, what he showed me is like what I said. It's this, what I call the dark arts, and I don't mean dark like negatively. I mean like sort of this missing link of stuff that used to be passed down from generation to generation, but along the way, and I have a lot of reasons for that. We don't have to go into that, but a lot of these things now maybe are starting to come back. There's a lot of great technicians out there. Bruce Becker, I always have to mention, who's one of Freddie's sort of most prominent. He studied with Freddie probably more than anybody, and Jojo Mayers a lot. His DVDs and videos, of course, talk about this stuff. And I think there's enough people that are very serious about technique and stuff that you can find these things. But again, most people just don't have the patience. They want the magic bullet. They want to be sexy now. They want gospel chops yesterday. And fine, great. But at the end of the day, we get hired to play 2 and 4 and to make it feel right. And to really make it feel, anybody can play boom splat, boom boom splat. But why is it that Steve Gadd, when he plays boom splat, gets hired by Paul Simon and Chick Corea and Shaka Khan and James Taylor and all of that? What's going on there? Those are the things that I think out about more than anything as a teacher. And people go, well, I can do that, so that's enough for them, right? Okay, I've got it to this place. What's next? That means nothing, that means you can get your arms and legs to do some stuff, right? It ain't about that. So these kind of lessons I took away from my time with Freddie, and it was a very profound experience. And sometimes I'd get there at 5 p.m. and I would not get home until like 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock the next morning. I would stay up all night with him, and maybe 3 or 4 hours of that would be in the lesson room and the rest would be hanging out. And it was very deep, I mean, you'd walk out of there, like I said, I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I knew it was pretty cool. And I stuck around. And it just, you had to set the time aside, and in later years, by 95, 96, I was on the road so much with the band that I just couldn't continue the lessons. But it was both challenging and fantastic.
I have I guess somehow I can relate to that. I'm not going to mention the name because this person is very much alive, so you might not want me to share this, but I had a teacher, funny enough, also from New York, who, it was kind of exactly the same thing. I would have lessons at his house, which was kind of a small flat. This was in Lisbon, in Portugal. He moved to Portugal to retire. He told me he was working harder than ever. Completely obsessed with teaching and education. Yeah, like super cool guy. But it was the same thing, right? Like the lesson would go on for however long, and then all right, I need a lift. He would just demand the lift at the end, and I'm like, okay, and you don't know where to, but he needs a lift. So I can relate to that kind of relationship.
And Freddie would put his students to work. He would like put them to service in a way. which in a way is very much like an old master-apprentice relationship. You know, you would put yourself to service of the master, and in all those many ways. And if the master told you to do this, you did it. You didn't question why, you know. And I mean, Freddy would push it. You know, he would, you know, I would say he would take advantage of his students. But again, when you think about what he gave, he expected what he gave, which was he was 100% in it to win it, 100% committed. I'm so grateful because, you know, he was 100% committed to my evolution. It was not, you know, yeah, he wanted money. I mean, you know, there's always a financial transaction, but it went so much beyond that. He was committed to sharing knowledge. And even though sometimes it didn't feel that way, or it felt like he was, you know, berating me, as opposed to, you know, he, like I said, he wasn't super warm and fuzzy, but he came from the era where people didn't, you know, suffer fools, as they say. I mean, if you showed up and you didn't practice, you'd go home, go away, come back when you have this together. And he said that to me a few times. You know, it created a whole new, like, oh man, I've really got to get my act together at a higher level if I'm going to bring this material to this guy. You know, and the material is hard. It's hard to explain exactly what it is in a very short session, but it's about movement and balance and grip. And I talk a lot about these issues in my podcast. I talk about issues like form and, you know, break things down. So if people are interested, it's the Daniel Glass Show is on Drummer's Resource, which is a competitor to you, but yes, a colleague, yes. But yeah, it's fine. I mean, there's tons of drumming podcasts, and I think drummers are very community oriented. So we love podcasts. We love learning. We love knowledge. We love sharing. You know, and that's a cool thing. So yeah, every week, I guess I have about 20 shows now on there, and there's all kinds of stuff. There's Tales from the Road. There's interesting things. I did a whole podcast about earworms. You know, I talk about, like, I always have music in my head at any given moment, you know, and so I did a whole podcast about that, and, you know, things that maybe it's not interviews, only interviews. It's a wide variety of kind of stuff that I sort of cover in there. I did a podcast last week about the issues of being a left-handed drummer, which is something that I think a lot of people, you know, if you're a right-handed drummer, what do you care about what the issues are for being a left-handed drummer? But I think right-handers, if they knew a little bit more about what left-handers live with in life, I mean, in a way, we're sort of a misunderstood and somewhat discriminated against, although I use that term lightly, but, you know, a minority that suffers from some kind of discrimination. And I think, anyway, I talk about that in the podcast. So not to get too far off topic, but hey, that's...
No, actually, that makes me want to ask a question. What was Freddy's reaction to left-handedness?
Well, I could. He had a very beautiful old Ludwig set in his house, and then I think he had a DW. He has a very interesting story. I mean, he was living in L.A. I mean, he went back and forth between L.A. and New York, and so I studied with him primarily in Los Angeles, and he would not turn the drum set around for me for the first several years that we studied. So I had to learn all the exercises on my kit at home, and then I had to turn my kit around so I could do them for Freddy on a right-handed kit. Now, a lot of stuff was on the pad, and, you know, just working with, say, a bass drum and the pad, or a hi-hat and the pad. So it wasn't like I was playing, you know, super complex funk in odd times or something. That would have been really difficult, and probably would have benefited me, but it was challenging, you know. And then eventually, in our last couple of years, he did allow me to turn the drums around, but he yelled at me every step of the way if I adjusted something wrong. Oh, you don't do it like that, you know. Makes, you know, God, this is why all my shit is stripped out, you know, and all. I mean, it was challenged. You know, he would, just one last point about Freddy is that he would push you. He would push you because, again, it's an old school thing. You push people and they need to push back. You know, if they're going to grow, they need to push back. And I learned that with him. You know, I learned to push back a little bit, not in a hostile way or negative way, but just like understanding that what he was doing was pushing me. And the last time we hung out, which was in maybe 2010, he died in 2011, and I was already living in New York. I moved in 2010, so I didn't see him that much. But I went to his house to give him a copy of the Commandments book, because I said, Freddie, you know, he was one of the people I dedicated it to. I was so grateful. And I brought him a copy of the book. I signed it, and we stayed up all night. There was no lesson. I got there about 9, 10 o'clock, and we stayed up again all night. I drove home at 5 in the morning, just hanging, and he was looking through the book, and of course that brought up all kinds of stories. And it was a really, really beautiful, you know, I felt almost for the first time that he was acknowledging me as a peer or as somebody who had accomplished something rather than, you know, a student. And that was very meaningful for me.
I guess I want to use this next question to segue into the next kind of chapter of this conversation, which is, what do you think, after all you've said, that I have to ask this? What do you think is the importance of a mentor, and also what is the difference between a mentor and just a drum teacher who teaches you, you know, the coolest lick of the week?
Right.
Well, that's a heavy question, and mentorship takes many forms. If I think back to the mentors, the people that I would call mentors, that is sort of exactly what I explained to you earlier or expressed, which is that they were committed beyond an hour or an allotment of time for a financial transaction. They lived it, they breathed it, they were passionate about it. And when they saw that I was passionate about it, when they saw that I was willing to bring 100% to the situation, that I was committed, then they gave above and beyond. You know, then it ceased to really be about the money, you know, although of course there was money involved, but it ceased to be so much about that as it was about them being thrilled to impart their knowledge on me, and them being thrilled to watch my evolution in the world, you know. And I go back to Zorro, because Zorro was always so clear about that. I've had many mentors in life, and you know, musical and otherwise, and Zorro was like, here's what I'm doing, here's how I got there, here's what you can do, here's how, you know, I can help you to get there. You got to believe in yourself. I'll believe in you, but you got to believe in yourself. And I mean, he would just like, it was amazing, you know, because I felt like I was getting, you know, the book, The Big Gig. I felt like I got that whole book in person, you know. Although, again, you know, we had our issues, Zorro and I. Our relationship was 8 years long. It took 8 years to get that Commandments book done. And that's something else people have to realize, that in this business, nothing comes easy. No one is going to hand you things. You know, you have to earn it. You have to be there consistently. And, you know, but in the end, I mean, Z and I are great friends. I don't see him that often because, again, we're not living in the same city, and he's extremely busy and I'm super busy. But when I see him, you know, I saw him at the NAMM show back in January, and we just hung hard. We had a great hang, huge hug, you know, a lot to catch up on. We give each other a lot of crap, jokingly, you know, like we sort of, because he's, you know, he's also serious as a heart attack, that guy, Zorro. I mean, he's Mr. Positivity and Mr. Motivation, but if you're going to work with him, he's going to put you to it, you know, because that's the way it is. That's our business. If you're serious about this business, you better be serious. And so anyway, I try to bring the same thing to all of my teaching. You know, I love teaching. I don't teach full time. I pretty much teach. I'm very lucky. Again, I don't say lucky, because luck to me is preparation meets opportunity. I have a whole podcast about that too, about preparation. But it's, I have designed things, and that now, you know, because I wasn't ever going to be a teacher that teaches little kids, you know, at the beginning, although I don't mind beginners. Like, I actually have several students who really are almost total beginners. That's almost better for me because there's no sort of bad habits to unwind and things like that. And as long as they're serious about what they're doing and they practice and they're committed to the process, great. So I don't want to give the impression that, I only accept students at this level or anything like that. I teach high-level people. I teach weekend warriors. I teach people who play drums for fun, and I teach beginners. But all of my students, for the most part, are extremely committed. They practice really hard. They take it as seriously as I do. And as a result, I do a lot of mentoring. Today, I teach via Skype, and I teach people from all over the world. And there are some challenges to it, but in general, I've figured out a way to do it, and I think a lot of teachers now use Skype, obviously. I can pretty much teach you anything on Skype that I could teach you in person. There are some benefits to teaching in person. But what's cool is when I have the opportunity to meet someone in person that I've never met before, and that was today. There's a guy who he is in the U.S. Army. He's stationed in Germany, and he and I have been working on stuff for maybe a year now. And he's from Pennsylvania, so he came home for the holidays, and he came up to New York. And he's so serious that he met me at my practice space at 7:30 this morning. He got a hotel 2 blocks away, and he came up and we did a lesson at my practice space from 7:30 to 9. And it was just a beautiful hang. Then we went and had breakfast and hung out, and I don't have time to hang all day to do the Freddy Gruber thing, but I feel exactly like that with Freddie. And he's like, oh, thanks for taking this extra time. And do I owe you extra money? I'm like, no, man, let's go have breakfast and hang, And I feel Zorro told me, he said, you're going to mentor people. He said, I'm mentoring you right now, but you're going to mentor people. And you'll see that mentoring people is as satisfying as being mentored, And I really do believe that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure,
I mean, and that's something that's been occupying my mind a lot, which is to find ways to do that more, because again, time is a cruel mistress, and I find it difficult to commit physically in a very tangible way, the same way that I feel committed. Like right, it doesn't seem to translate well sometimes because of time management. But
it's true.
Yeah. It's a challenge, but somehow I'm because it occupies my mind so much. I'm pretty sure that I'll find. Actually, one of the reasons I do these things, the vlogs, now the podcasts, I write, I do that, is because of that. Is trying to somehow fill in that gap between that hour a week that I spend with each one of my students, and then being able to send out an email at 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening with a new vlog, a new podcast now, and like, okay, listen to this now, a bit more of me, and for free. There you go. Right? Yeah.
Well, and it is, this is the way it works in the world of social media today. You need to give away a lot of content. You need to give away a lot of wisdom, but at the same time, it's doing that and being honest and real about it that will bring you success. And will bring you students, or bring you work, or bring you, money. All of these things, that's just, we live in a different world now, and that's a whole nother conversation, But I've spent a lot of time studying that aspect of the business as well.
I saw a webinar that you did maybe last year, maybe more. I'm not even sure, but I saw that on social media and self-promotion and whatnot, and your thoughts on it were exactly what I suspected, but I was too lazy to to act it out, and that at the time it was a nice little kick in the butt for me to, what, this is what works. Let's get it done.
So it was for the Sabian Education Network,
correct? I think, right? Which I'm a part of.
Yeah, cool. Great. Yeah, that was fun, man. And what was really neat about that was that I thought, well, my student base doesn't really resemble most teacher student base. In other words, I teach, like I said, mostly adults, mostly experienced drummers, people that are really, really super serious. And most teachers don't teach people that are adults. They don't teach people that are necessarily super serious. They have, I'm not sort of the typical teacher. So what I did in this education webinar was to speak about three friends of mine who are extremely successful educators who work. One is in Maryland, one is here in New York, and one is in San Diego. And sort of that, I liked that idea. So I actually talked to each one of them before I did the webinar, and then I kind of shared them and all the things that I thought were great about them and how they worked it. And each one of them has been successful in different ways. Each one of them has used different tools and different techniques to run their teaching business. And then we did talk about social media, I guess, as well in that thing. But yeah, that was really. I guess
that leads us to the question that I'm selfishly most interested in, which is online education. This is something that I'm not sure where to place myself in terms of what I think of it. I see perhaps more pitfalls than benefits, but that might be me. So I'm asking a lot of people the same question. What do you think, including teachers who do a lot of online education? So I do understand that this is a very dangerous question to ask, especially people who are making a living with it.
What are all your secrets?
Well, actually, my question is dangerous because I ask it in a tone that of course already implies I'm not sure about it. And they feel it, they feel the tone, and they know my thoughts as well, I guess. But I'm trying to somehow see something positive ahead. I don't see it now. I like the access, and you've already mentioned Skype, and I love the access. The access is a great thing for me. But then there's so much crap out there that I get very concerned. My concern is basically this: what will swallow what? Will eventually the cream rise to the top, or will we just see the crap just take over the sea, right? It just, and that happens in nature, that can happen in the internet. I mean, things happen.
Good analogy, João. Very interesting.
But so I'd like to know what you think of it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, good. Really, no, very, very good question, and I understand your concern. I think that, I mean, I don't have a nice, pretty answer wrapped up in a box with a bow on it for you for this question, because it is an ongoing process. I think in speaking from my own particular knowledge, obviously, number one, or my own particular experience, number one, you have to have something good to teach. You have to have the goods, right? And that's very important. I think the more that you think that through and develop who you are as a teacher and have a game plan, then the more successful you will be. But I think the real key to online teaching is that you have to treat yourself as a business. And, you know, I think you obviously have done an amazing job setting up in Leeds. I could see on the camera you have this school, and it's very well organized. You seem like you're very well organized, and you've obviously tapped into the community. You obviously are doing this full time. You know, so all those things are great marks of success. So maybe in your case, there's no reason to get into online education if you don't need to. You know, if that's, you know, I have another friend in San Diego, this guy, Rick Stojak, that I talk about in the Sabian Education Network thing. I don't think he sees anybody on Skype, but he's booked from morning till night. He's got every kid in San Diego, you know, coming to his studio. I think that, as I said, it's really vital that when you use social media is about creating a community around your passion. And if you're, you know, anybody can do this. Really, anybody can do this, because we're all different people. We're all individuals. We're all passionate about things. We all, you know, are excited about things that we probably know more about than most other people, right? And so, you know, what does your community look like? Well, you're creating that community right now by doing all the things that you do. Your YouTube videos, your tutorials, your podcast that you're putting out, your Facebook page, all that kind of stuff. And people will become attracted to you because just the way you are attracted to other people. You know, you saw my stuff over the years. Oh, this guy's interesting. I like what he does. And now we get to meet each other. So it's sort of the same thing. It takes time, you know. It's not going to happen overnight. If people say, well, you're already well known, so of course when you do this, it's a no-brainer. But me, I'm different. I'm a nobody. Well, I was a nobody for a long time, you know, in the greater, bigger picture of things. There were, you know, times when nobody answered my calls. When my first clinics, 3 people showed up or 6 people showed up, or, you know, I mean, and, you know, these are a lot of the things that Zorro said to me. People come up with plenty of excuses as to why they won't succeed, you know. So, you know, it's about being honest with yourself and coming up with ways to package up your passion and present it to the world, what you are passionate about. And you got to think about, you know, a lot while you do that. So that's sort of in terms of getting people to see who you are and understand what you do as a drummer, what you do as a teacher, who you are as a person. All those things are going to attract people to you. The actual online part, I think the only thing that I cannot do on Skype that I could do in the real world is play at the same time with my student. And I don't need to do that in the way that I teach. Now, maybe other teachers, that's an important thing for them, so they might have some problems with Skype. Also, like I said, I don't really teach young children, although I have had some mature kids. I'm teaching a kid right now who's 11, and he's totally getting into everything we're doing. You know, he's into it. I've had 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, teenagers. I don't have that many, again, because most of them are, well, that's not where I've gone with it. It's not really who I'm seeking. But the ones that I've had who are serious about it, we could do great work online. So, you know, I think I don't have any real answer about why online works, but all I know is I have figured out ways to, you know, for example, people say, well, a problem with Skype is that you can't hear the drums very well. If the person's computer is there, the drums are distorted. So my answer to that is, if you think about it, the way you move and the sound that you make are very related, right? If you move in very consistent ways and you're always moving and striking the same way, then, or you're getting the stick to have a particular response, then the sound will be there. The sound that you desire will come from that. So I don't even really care what the sound is like. As long as I can see the person move, I know what it's going to sound like. And I know what to tell them to do, you know, over time. So that's one issue that people say they have a problem with. Like, what are some of your other issues?
Well, maybe I should have clarified. I have no issues with Skype. I don't really see Skype as part of this umbrella of online education for me. Skype for me is more a way of communication. To be clearer, I guess, like online education for me, it's more, you know, the one teacher for the masses. That's where I tend to start, my eyebrows tend to go up, and I get a little bit suspicious of it because, well, two things. I've done a little bit of research on that, and I became a client of all these big websites, and I see what works. I really see what doesn't work. The ones that did work, I'll perhaps mention their names. I won't force it, but maybe I will. The ones that didn't work, I won't do it because there's no point. My issue was that I could see that it, for me anyway, again, this is a very personal take on it, I could see that it was a revenue-based model. There was zero interest in results, and it became about the teacher, and that breaks my heart.
Well, okay, so let me stop you there, because number one, you can't, I can't, none of us can control what's going on in the world, and and as much as we might look at what's going on in the world and be dismayed, which trust me, I am on a regular basis, at the same time, we can't control it, and we have to do good work. And if we do good work, then we're contributing to the good of the world, at least as we see it. And that's really as much as we can do in life. I would rather try to be positive in my positivity versus cutting someone else down. Although, camera, I probably spend a lot of time criticizing people in certain ways. We all do that. And I'm not putting you down in any way for having concerns, because I get it. And I agree 100% about the idea of the cult of personality and revenue-based models and what are people really learning out of the experience. But you also have to think, like, sometimes people, what they really want is the chance to have access to somebody who makes them feel good about themselves, whether they're learning drums or not. Or they want to be part of a community. Some of these online entities that you talk about have forums, and people can commune with other drummers, and that inspires them. They feel a part of a community. And that's, again, I go back to this word community, because the ones of these entities out there that are successful because people feel part of something. And that is where, me throwing my passion out there and doing it in the way that I do it, there are some people that are going to love that, and they're going to listen to my podcast, they're going to buy my book, they're going to take lessons, they're going to come to my clinics, they're going to check me out when I come through town performing. Great. Other people, they're not into it, and they may be into something else. I do think that a lot of these subscription-based type of services fail. I think most of them fail, or they don't make any money, because people can see through the sales pitch. And I think it's a very difficult way to go, because you're taking on and you're losing subscribers all the time. And some of these guys make a lot of money. Some of them teach great stuff. Some of them, they're going to come and go, And I don't think that one-on-one instruction is going to disappear ever. I think there's no substitute for it, whether it's done on Skype or in person. I think certainly being in person has some benefits that you can't accomplish on Skype. In other words, I can move people around physically, lift their arms and legs and things like that, which is helpful. But that said, I've taught hundreds of people on Skype, and most of them have not been unhappy, and they stay with me for a long period of time, and they see incredible results with their band and with their what they're trying to do. So I guess that's what I would have to say. Like, it is dismaying, and you could also say, people don't go to clinics anymore because there's all these videos on the web, and who are these people that are playing along with songs, right? What do they call that? Covers, and they have millions of hits because they're playing along, which to me is kind of cool, but kind of also fake, because Neil Peart is still playing, and so you're still hearing Neil Peart. So of course, when drummer X plays along with Neil Peart, he's going to sound amazing, if you balance everything out right. Okay, great. But everybody's doing what they're going to do, man. Time marches forward. And I struggle. I'm now 51 years old, and I often struggle with, like, getting into that attitude of, like, when I was young, we did things the right way, and kids today, and this and that. And you have to let that go. And, my feeling is you have to do good work. You have to do the best work you can with the best attitude you can, and be a smart business person. Understand what of what you're doing is successful, what of what you're doing isn't successful. Don't hang on to things that aren't successful. Be flexible, and continue to be a student. One of the greatest things for me is that I'm always learning, both about history and about vintage stuff and about, drumming, and trying to get better. Even though I spend a lot of time now sharing my wisdom and mentoring others, I don't want to get into this thing of, like, this heavy ego that teachers can get into, I'm the teacher, so I therefore must know everything, and I have nothing to learn from anyone else. And that's a dead end road too, but it's hard. I mean,
no, just hard. As I guess just to put a bow on that, on my own question, all the lessons that I take these days are via Skype. I mean, I live in an environment that I don't really have a lot of super elite drummers around here. This is not that big of a city, Leeds. So all the lessons that I take these days are via Skype. I learned, I told you, I think at the beginning, I've been learning with Klaus Hessler for maybe 2 or 3 years now, on and off.
Great.
It's always via Skype. Obviously, he's in Germany and I'm in England. So Skype is a great thing for me. It's just like I said, when it becomes, that I love the aspect of access and community. And by the way, mentioning the one that for me it really works is Drumeo. Because Drumeo, they tapped into that idea of this is a multicultural and multi-input kind of platform where we'll have teachers saying opposite things, and I love that. Right? I love the opportunity to see different points of view, but when it's the one guy, one man band, like then
results is what the world looks at, and a few of those guys have had great results, and most of them, a lot of guys haven't. So, everybody puts it together in their own way. Everybody has their own vision. Everybody has their own idea of what they want to do, and more power to them. We're all out here trying to do what we do, make a living from it at the same time. And everybody has their own pathway, I guess, as far as education goes. And I try, like I said, to be an observer and not a competitor. And and at the same time work extremely hard to carve my path that's unique to me. Which will continue to make people excited about becoming a part of my community, and I love that because there's other people that are excited about what I'm excited about. And so it's like that idea about I get to make a living doing what I love, is probably one of the hardest things, and to do it for a sustained period of time. I've been doing it for 27 years now, and I'm kind of astounded because probably all the time I'm like, how the hell am I what's happening in 3 months, Oh God, it's all over. They finally found me out and I'm going to have to hang it up and go be a clerk somewhere, But for some reason it just
you might be the real deal then. This seems to be a common thread actually amongst all these conversations that the self-talk in my skull is also the same kind of tone, that I'm a fraud, and one day they'll find out, and that's it, that's the end.
Yeah. Well, and I remember, Zorro puts out this book, The Big Gig, right, which is the ultimate, confident, I've been there, here's the way you do it, and rah, and all that. So the fall that book is released, he does a clinic at the Percussive Arts Society convention, PASIC, right? So I went to his clinic, and in the Q&A, a young teenage girl raises her hand and says, she's like, God, you come off so confident, like, you seem like you really have it all together. I'm just paraphrasing here, but and she says, do you ever have moments where you have self-doubt, or you feel like things you feel hopeless or whatever? And he said, every single day. So I mean, I don't think anybody is impervious to that. It's tough. It's tough to live with ourselves, isn't it?
It is. But I get earlier I wrote something down here because you were saying that you tend to always go big or go home, and you always go for epic. That's your word. And I wrote down, and this is something that is fairly personal to me, and I wrote about this before, and I vlogged about this before, which is burnout.
Yes.
And how do you avoid that? Because I've done like 1/100th of what you've done, And last year I had a severe case of burnout. I was done, literally, physically, mentally, emotionally. I took me 3 to 4 months, and then I documented this because I found that important to be talked about.
Yeah. Well, living in New York City, I keep up a tremendous pace, and sometimes I feel like it's too much. It is very, very difficult. There's no doubt about it. And when you're this focused, tunnel vision on something so specific, and you spend every day working on that, and I essentially have 3 careers. I am a drummer, I perform, and I have to keep my chops up and make, videos, and I do a lot of gigs in New York City, and I'm going to Italy and Hungary next year and Argentina. I've already got trips set up, but then I'm also an educator, and so I'm teaching a lot, and I'm writing, and I'm and then I'm an author, and I've got books that I'm always working on, and deadlines and stuff I've got to produce. I write this column for Drum Magazine, and they're always like, "Your deadline was yesterday, Glass. What's going on?" So my poor wife, who I think is a saint for putting up with me, I'm scrambling, running as hard as I can. And my life these days consists of literally whatever fire I'm putting out, that's where my head is at. And I'm just like, and then I run to the next fire to put it out. And it's sort of like, that's how it feels. So I definitely can get to a place where I feel very burned out. And it actually started taking a toll on my health. Because, when you get into I don't know, how old are you, João? 31. So you're a pup still, and, which is great. But, and of course, I don't want to generalize, because I hated it when older people were like, you're so young, you got no worries, But when you get into your 40s and then into your 50s, which I am now, things like stress and years of hitting drums and walking around New York City and being up late and getting up early and being in an intense state when you're teaching or when you're giving a clinic, and hours spent on the road driving, and all that, the stress of it can start to physically wear you down. And almost every colleague I have that's my age or older, half the time we get together, we talk about our injuries and our conditions and, all of this kind of stuff. So, a lot of that is finding things that can help recharge the batteries, which is difficult because people always, like, when they interview me, they're like, what are your hobbies? And I never have anything to put in there because my hobbies are my 3 careers, which I love. Within the last couple of years, I've experienced some physical issues in my body and weird things that I don't really want to get into too much, but it's a culmination of getting older, of having hit the damn drums since I was 7 years old, and living in New York, which is a very intense city and a very intense place to live. So it's always on hyperdrive. And what I've done is gone back to things that I know I guess you could say my hobbies, what I do in my spare time is try to take care of myself a little bit. So I swim, which is something I've gone back to. I hadn't done it for years. I was a runner, but my ankles can't handle running anymore. And I go to yoga class, and for me, I treat yoga class the way that I would treat taking drum lessons from Freddy Gruber, in that I've found, thankfully, a teacher here in New York who's very exacting, very specific, very focused, very articulate, very intense. I mean, this is kicking my ass so hard right now. But, it's not like physical, like PX90 workout type of thing. It's about understanding what's happening in your body. And look, the other thing is I try to do a little bit of breathing in the morning, kind of meditative breathing. I've done a lot of different yogas in my life and taken from different ones, and different ones have worked at different stages when I'm in a different place physically. So for me, and then at night preparing to go to bed, trying to go through a routine where I don't just fall asleep in front of the TV, or if I'm on the road, fall asleep in front of the TV in the hotel room. Be disciplined. and taking time, eating well, really watching my diet. Not that I'm gaining weight, I'm a skinny guy, but it all matters. And for me, those things make me feel less stressed, make me feel happier, make me feel less burned out. So that's sort of my solution. And I'm very committed to my wife. We don't have children, but I think that at various points in my life, I was committed to only music and wasn't committed to relationships. And I got remarried again. I took 13 years off. I was married in the late 90s for not very long. And then I took 13 years off, and I had girlfriends, but I wasn't really serious about it, about being with someone or getting married. And then part of the reason I moved to New York is to be with my now wife. And I feel like my commitment to my relationship is as important as my commitment to my music, and it's definitely, there's a battle there. And she's very, she knew going in that this is my obsession and my passion and that I'm a workaholic, which I am. But at the same time, I understand you cannot take a relationship for granted. And we do a lot of wonderful things together. And I'm trying to bring her with me when I go to different places. So she's come with me to Egypt. She's come with me to all over the U.S. She's come with me to, she went with me to Budapest last year. And she'll probably go with me to Argentina when I go there this year. So trying to, design my life and my career so that I can have quality time with my partner. And those things bring me, they're the ways to help alleviate the stress and enjoy my life. I have, of course, a lot of friends, but I don't really have a whole lot of time to hang out with friends. I don't do that much because, as you know, when you're full time, you are working all the damn time.
I do know, and I have a not even 2-year-old son.
Oh, yeah, you've got that.
So I got 2 full-time jobs.
Yes. Oh, yes. But of course, those things bring you pleasure as much as they're exhausting. They bring joy to your life. So, I think too often musicians are so tunnel vision. And when you're young, okay, fine. Like, that's your time to be obsessive beyond all reason. But we can't all just live in a cave, And I mean, maybe some people can, but I can't. And so for me, and I think teaching, like the mentor-mentee relationship I have with my students also makes teaching really fun. And also I have a lot of students who have become good friends. And I see them when I go to their place, or they've organized clinics for me or whatever, and we hang out, and it's beyond a business relationship. It is, and then of course on all my gigs, I play every Monday here at Birdland in New York City. And I always, I've developed after 7 years of every Monday when I'm in town, developed a lot of work connections out of that, a lot of friends out of that. But, we're busy people, and especially in New York, although I'm sure it's probably the same in Leeds, everyone's
not quite the same, but I hear you.
Yeah. But, the world we live in is a busy world today. And everybody's life is
it does move quickly. And for me personally, and just to kind of put things in perspective as to why I asked that question, because last year, like I said, I felt myself just going to a state of mental exhaustion, more than physical, to be completely honest. I feel and I felt healthy and fit, but my brain just went into shutdown mode. And one of the reasons, and that's why I brought up my son, was because I now started to feel for the first time ever the conflict between having to live in the real world for the first time.
Right.
Because I lived in my own fairy tale, right? And I just did my thing, and that was it. And I had my partner, but you can wait. I'll come home when I come home. And now I was out, and I was gigging, and I was teaching all day, and this and the other, and I was missing this kid like crazy. And it just started driving me crazy. Literally, it drove me to exhaustion because I just couldn't focus on anything.
Yeah.
And I found, and I'll say this just for anyone who might be struggling with the same thing, I found that for me, I had to learn how to manage the guilt. Because I felt guilty all the time.
Yeah.
And that was the cross that I had to learn how to not carry all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, go on. Sorry. Thank you for your time, for your insight. It's very much appreciated. And is there anything that you wanna share with everyone that you're up to? You mentioned a couple of future projects that you would like to.
Well, I would say that the places where I regularly live in the virtual world, where people can tap in and connect with me and converse with me about different issues, are the podcast I have, which is actually part of Drummers Resource podcast. It's called The Daniel Glass Show. Every Wednesday, the show airs on Drummers Resource. If you go to drummersresource.com, you can subscribe and all that. And I also have a Facebook page, which is called Daniel Glass Drummer Author Educator, which is my community on Facebook. I have almost 34,000 followers now. I post a lot of really cool videos and other footage and some kind of wisdom type stuff, but a lot of stuff that is designed to get people to converse and share their experiences, and we have a really great time there. It's a really wonderful place, and again, I think it's a community that I've created, that, you know, people that are passionate about what I'm passionate about, and so it's been a wonderful learning experience for me. You know, it's not just for me to blast out, here's my next gig or that kind of stuff. It's really a place to. And you know, because of the knowledge I've gained from the research and the history and the music I've done, I sort of tap into some different stuff that a lot of people may not know about, and a lot of interesting drumming clips, music clips, and then I try to curate the clips so that I'm not just saying here's a clip of so and so. I try to talk about why it's important and, you know, context, right? The why behind the what. So I'd say those are the two places. Of course, I have a website, danielglass.com, and people are welcome to email me, write to me, text me, whatever the hell. If you come to New York, I play every Monday at Birdland Jazz Club, the legendary Birdland Club here in New York. It's a fun show, and come on down and check it out. I'm there every Monday that I'm in town. It's a great, entertaining night, and amazing music and great people sitting in. And so those are sort of the things I'm up to. And I've got new projects coming down the way, but you know, we'll talk about those next time.
Enjoy your gig. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to yak with you, and I wish you all the best, man. And great to meet you virtually, and good luck.
The Educational Physics Podcast.